Day by day, little by little, we write the story of our lives. Join author Joe Alch on a walk down memory lane with tenacious humans who didn't let their circumstances dictate their life and what they could become. Welcome to the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast.
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm here. We're doing part 2 of the Lemon Tree, my memoir. But today we are, Chris Ashaki, my dear friend, is interviewing me on my books. We're doing part 2, and we're just glad you're here, and I hope that you can hear the message in my story, and just, Chrissa, take it away.
And it's a great story. So I was up until 10 o'clock last night, 10:30, continuing reading the book, and I am finishing this weekend. But where I want to start is where we left off last time. So your mother left when you were 13. Mm-hmm. How did this affect you? Can you kind of walk through what that looked like when she officially left?
Our family was so good at pretending that when she left, looking back as an adult, she was gone. She was already gone. The only difference was we had to continue to pretend. So this was more real in the pretending, if that makes sense. The day after my mother left, she left on a Saturday. On Sunday, we were getting ready for church, and my dad said, now, mum's the word, don't say anything about your mother. And for the last 6-8 months, she hadn't been going to church with us. So it was always the 4 of us, my brother, sister, my dad, and I anyway. So we had to continue to protect her. So instead of looking at our own needs, we had to look at the appearance that we were making at church. So
so even though she left, it was still protecting her.
We were protecting her. We were always protecting her.
And your dad, how did it affect... Well, first of all, let me back up. How, in your heart of hearts, how did it really, truly affect you as the 13-year-old who needed your mom, who you've always been reaching out, trying to gain her attention, affection, love, no matter what she did or, didn't do all of those years during your childhood? What did that look like for you? I mean, where were you when she, in your heart and with the Lord too, is a question I have. How did you feel during that whole time?
Well, I remember when my mother left, when she told me 2 days before she left, she told me that she couldn't live with our father anymore, that he didn't want to move, and so she had no choice, and she was going to be moving. It was very scripted when she told me. She told me first, and then she told my brother and sister after they got home from school. But she told me, and I remember feeling numb. My brother and sister came in from school. They were in the living room. She asked them to sit down. She called me from my bedroom. I went out to the living room, and it was as if it was a one-act monologue. Her words were to the T exactly what she said to me. It was rehearsed. There were no tears. I think she had been working up this script. She was already gone, like I said, but she had cut her feelings off. And I think the hardest thing for me, she was very close to my brother, my younger brother. She loved having a son. She did not like having daughters. But the fact that she was so black and white with my brother too, I thought surely she will take him with her. And I knew their marriage wasn't a good one. Mm-hmm. They were complete opposites. There was no love between the two of them. But I thought if she had to leave, and my dad was prideful and stubborn, and I'm sure he did say, if you're leaving me and you're not taking the kids, I'm not losing everything, because I've tried to give to this marriage. But I think when she told us and we were sitting there, I just thought, surely she's not going to do this to Gilly. She's not going to do this to my brother. And I immediately went into protection mode for my brother. It wasn't about me. I had to protect my brother, you know.
Well, and that's kind of how it was when from the time he was born until, I mean, that's how it was, because you still, there was a time when she coddled him, and I mean, he was her everything. But then the older he got, it was still not the same treatment as she treated you and Hope, but it was very...
Yeah, she should never have been a mother.
Yeah.
And that's what's so sad when you see things on the news about these mothers with their children and abandoning their children. And she was one of those. She would have made the news had it been 2019. We would have been involved with Child Protective Services. But at the time, early 70s, there wasn't anything like that, you know. So we had to learn to survive. We had to learn to cope. We just did the best we could. We were in survival mode.
So how did it affect your dad? I know he was very prideful, and he also wanted to protect the image of the family and not let people know that she had left officially, and you still went to church the next day and sat on the pew, and mum's the word, which I think was a popular phrase that he said kind of often. But how did it affect your dad?
Well, I think in my dad's eyes, he never felt he measured up to his parents. And my grandmother, my cruel grandmother, she felt criticism was the best form of praise for a child and teenager, that criticism would get the job done. That was her way. She never gave any accolades for anything. My dad never felt good enough. Everybody in my grandmother was a nurse. My grandfather was in medicine. My uncle, his older brother, became a pediatrician. My dad had no interest in medicine. He was more of an artist. He could write. He wasn't a good singer, but he loved music. He loved designing. He wanted to be an architect. That totally threw off my grandmother. My grandfather thought that was a waste of time. So in their eyes, he never measured up. When he married this beautiful, talented Baptist, Charlotte Church at the time, Judy Garland type voice, he finally had redeemed himself. So without her, his image was shattered once again. And there he was again, that crippled little boy that couldn't do anything right.
So it basically took him back to being the failure in his parents' eyes that he always felt.
And as a daughter, I was a little more outspoken. And I had a servant's heart back then anyway. And so immediately I feel sorry for my dad. I feel sorry for my brother. And I'm trying to think, okay, how can we still be a family? What can we do to just still be a family, still serve the Lord, not have everybody stare at me? Or I really felt that I wore this scarlet A. I felt like I wore a label. Her mother walked out. We lived in predominantly Catholic. Divorce was not allowed in the Catholic Church. And if you did separate or divorce, the option was an annulment. And those were very hard to get. So divorce did not happen. And my parents' separation was the very first separation in our church in Slidell. And the pastors, the youth ministers, nobody knew how to handle it. And so instead of holding my hand, Joe, what can we do? How can I help you? Can I pray for you? What do you need? They just stayed silent.
Swept it under the rug like it didn't happen. Wow.
Yeah, and it was devastating.
Well, and I know that there's a line that, it really got me. So you would stand by the phone and just and be around, y'all would be cooking, or, you know, your dad's making dinner or whatever, and you're just waiting for the phone to ring. You're waiting for your mom to call you. The day after she left, you're waiting for the phone to ring because you just knew she was going to care enough to call you. And it said, its silence seemed to scream out our insignificance. And that was like a knife in my heart, because just knowing it was all, you always kind of felt insignificant, but to really own that in that moment, that she has a different life now. She left and we're on our own. It reminds me of a part in a previous chapter in 18 during your baptism, where your sister had a big baptism party and it was this big thing. And then when you knew that the Lord was calling you to him and it was your time, again, your baptism date was always pushed to the side, and it was always, you know, it wasn't priority to make sure that you were treated the same and that you had the same experiences or similar experiences that your sister did, who's the oldest. And it was almost like you were doing it because she did it, instead of encouraging your decision with the Lord that you and only you made. And so that it brought me to those 2 points when I read that line that just showed that was kind of rock bottom when she left, but never, she was always gone, like you said. But it was different. It was final. It was final.
And as far as my baptism, in the Baptist faith, we make what's called a public
profession
of faith. And my sister had decided she wanted to be baptized and became a Christian. And we were taught we be the humble, subservient female daughters, granddaughters. So anything we did, we needed my grandmother's approval. She was so controlling. And what Hope did, she did like a good little girl, went to my grandmother and said, I'm ready to be baptized. So grandmother got to be in the spotlight with my sister and loved every minute of it. When I decided I was just different, a different personality. So I didn't feel I needed to tell anybody. I talked to my Sunday school teacher. And so I just decided it's time. I'm ready to accept Jesus Christ as my Savior. But I totally threw my grandmother's plan off. She felt like I did that for attention, and I didn't. It threw off her plans. She wanted to be in the spotlight. She needed to be the one that held my hand and had led me to the Lord. And so it did throw her off. So as a punishment, they did baptisms on Sunday night. So as a punishment, the next 3 or 4 Sunday nights, I got ready for my baptism. You had to carry, they put you in a gown, and you took your clothes off. You'd wear your underwear. So I brought a little clean pair of underwear 3 Sunday nights in a row. Never had my baptism. And I really do think that my grandmother called the church office and said she needs to really understand what she did. I think she did that for her sister's benefit, or to be like her sister. And the church went along with it. My grandmother was so respected in the church, and she was such a pillar as a female, submissive woman in the Baptist church. My grandmother had a lot of pull. And so I think she did that as a punishment. Like, we're going to show her who makes the decisions here. And I still, to this day, the day I was baptized, I didn't cry. It was a happy moment. But it wasn't. She ruined it. She ruined anything monumental. If she wasn't in control, she ruined it. So I hope one day I can get baptized, maybe in the Jordan River. Maybe Dr. Jeffress will do it.
Yeah.
But I do hope one day that I would love to be baptized and really feel loved and, and
cherished and celebrated for that public. I mean, because that's what it is. And for her to think, and there was a part in the book where it said you went down, you got out of the pew when you went down to the pastor, and even to make your profession of faith, you basically got in trouble for it. And that she, I think afterwards, people would come, and I remember this growing up in our independent Baptist churches, people would come down as in like a reception line and, oh, I'm so proud of you. And, you know, this, and really embrace the person who's made that decision for Christ. And she basically grabbed your elbow or your arm and was like,
scolded me.
Yes. And to me, from a reader, also from growing up in the church and understanding to an extent, you know, kind of understanding a little bit of how we grew up in the church. But just to see that it was still all about her and all about, yes, she's this upstanding pillar in the church and this submissive wife that has this horrible home, you know, secret that can't get out, which is why I think also too, why she maybe couldn't scold you as much and get you in trouble as she wanted to, because she knew you still had something on her.
Right. And she knew that I would speak up. And she was terrified of that.
Well, and to go along with that, Joe, how did all of this from, and I know we kind of touched on it last time in part one, but how did childhood to when you're growing up and you accepted the Lord, you accepted Christ, your baptism, your mom leaves, you still have to go to choir practice, and, you know, you have to go to church and do all of the Christian functions that you have to do to, you know, make sure everybody knows that we're fine and nobody talks about it. In your heart, do you remember what was your stance with the Lord at that time? Like, where were you at emotionally and spiritually with the Lord, knowing that you were saved, that you had Jesus, you know, in your heart, but in reality, stuff was tough. And where were you?
I was angry, and I was like, I felt like I had won the lottery, but with the worst family situation. It was like I won the booby prize. I don't know what happened, but I remember my grandmother was from a family of 9 or 10 children, and we met all the uncles and aunts, and they were so fun. We just loved her brothers and sisters and their families. And I remember thinking, God, why did I have to have her as a grandmother? Why couldn't I have had any of her sisters? I remember questioning, like, why did we get stuck with her? I would ask questions. And I know when my mother left, you know, I would cry every night. I'd cry myself to sleep, like, Lord, please let this just be a bad dream. And when I wake up tomorrow, it's going to all be over. But I think God was preparing me for bigger things. And there is strength in the struggle. And it was things like the lemon tree, or a neighbor that was so kind, or a teacher that he was saying to me, Joe, I'm here. Just trust me. Hang on in there. I will redeem the day. Just hang in there. And I had these little glimpses of hope. But I was angry. It wasn't fair. You know, I was angry at God, you know, but I knew he loved me too. So it was conflicting. I you know, I just had to keep believing, trusting. And when I would go to church and get involved, and we'd sing or have an activity that was so much fun, like we did some of the funnest things in high school with our church, I knew that he was there. You know, I never felt like, Jesus, hold my hand here. It was kind of an all or nothing. I was like, okay, whatever I'm supposed to be going through, then I guess this is what you're dealing me. And once I get out of high school, I'm out of here. I was counting the days to be out of that town, out of high school, and just to being able to start a new life.
Well, and you did, which was really awesome. And I'm going along in that part of the book, which is wonderful. But so as a teenager, how did you find acceptance as a teenager? Like, when you think of everything you've been through and family situation, and not only is your mom gone and just absent your entire life, but your dad, he started drinking, right? Is that correct? After your mom left? Was he drinking before that?
He was drinking, but it was not at home. We lived so close to my grandmother, so we didn't have alcohol in the house. But he would go drinking.
No good
That's
Baptist
what he
did.
was doing. No, they didn't. But he would drink Fridays and Saturday nights, and I think that's where all his money went.
Mm-hmm.
But he was rebellious. You know, my grandmother had an idea of the life she wanted for him, and he always struggled with, I'm not good enough. And I think part of that too, I saw my dad and I saw his life, and I'm like, I'm not going to turn out like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to turn out selfish like my mother. So there's got to be another one. There's got to be another road.
There has to be.
You know, there's got to be a medium there. We take care of ourselves, but we're not so consumed with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So when was the point where there was a point in the book where your dad, being Jack, and me getting to know him in his way later years and not for very long, but he was home with, and Hope was at LSU at this
Hope
time.
had gone to LSU, and Dad was home. And so
And it was the three of y'all.
It was the three
you-
of us. And I wound up getting involved in high school in activities, anything I could join just to be away from our house. Because the house, when my mother left, she took all of the knickknacks, all the pictures, all the little side table, just anything with any reminder of her was gone. And so going to our house, I just felt like it was a shell. And the sadness and evil and sickness was so thick. I couldn't stand to be at our house. So it was just better to be away. And my dad was so heartbroken. He would stay home, drink. He would go to bed, go to his room at 6:30 to 7 at night. My brother, I remember, he'd go to his room and he would like lay on his bed and just stare at the ceiling and cry. And I was just like, we cannot live like this. We are all going to die if we continue living like this. And maybe that was the Lord saying, Joe, come on, SOS here. Let's do something. So one night, Dad and Gilly and I had dinner, and Dad was going to his room. It was like 6:30, 6:45, and I stopped in the hall on the way to his room, and I said, Dad, you've got to date, or you've got to do something. We're all drowning here. You've got to get a life, and there are other people out there. And my dad said, honey, I don't feel right. Your mother's left, and I don't feel right about leaving you and Gilly. You're by yourselves. And I said, Dad, it's okay for you to date. You can have a date and have fun. You need to have a life too. So that very next day, I got home from school. The phone was ringing. It was Dad. He had a date. Don't wait up for me.
He didn't waste any time.
He wasted no time. And that night, we rarely saw our dad, with the exception of church service. Dad was never home. He left my brother and I a blank check that he'd signed to go to the grocery, and we'd get our groceries for the week. And my brother and I, 15 and 13, were completely on our own.
And you basically figured out your meals.
We figured out meals,
everything.
lunches. We signed excuses if we were sick. We would go and buy poster board if we needed poster board. And mind you, my mother never checked in. What do you need? Can I take you to dinner? She was off in La La Land in a relationship, and it was almost like she had forgotten she had another family.
And I remember there's times in the book, a couple times where you would go because the apartment that she had was right by your school. And almost like, that she was saying, here's my life. It's not with their parent, it's not there anymore with the family. I'm independent. This is my thing. Her rebellion, and openly showing even to your friends at school, which put that scarlet letter on you even more, that she had no regard about, because it wasn't about the children ever. It was always about her. And you tried to go and reach out to her. You would call to see if you can come over. You were the one always having to make that effort, and you had to initiate all contact with her, even if you stood at the door and she, oh, how was your day, whatever, and then you left. It was never an inviting motherly type of relationship, even after she left.
Well, and the weekend she left, we went to New Orleans. It was a Saturday, and I remember it so vividly. She was going to have movers move her things, so my dad got us out of the house, and she gave him till 5 o'clock. So We got home a few minutes after 5, and I remember looking at the phone, and she didn't give us her phone number. That was before cell phones. And if you did get a phone line, it usually took a couple days for it to work. And all I could think about was my poor mother sitting around these boxes, crying her eyes out, brokenhearted. And I really wanted to see her and make sure she was okay. I was just devastated with worry and grief that she was not okay. We found it. She didn't call us all weekend. We watched the phone, and I remember Hope wanted to get on the phone for something, or Gillian was like, no, don't get on the phone because she might call. So we sat and saw this phone that never rang for 2 days. So Monday morning, we usually took the bus to school or walked, and that next Monday, my dad offered to bring us to school because he knew it had been a hard weekend. The apartment she moved into was directly in front of the high school. And when he drove us to the driveway to pull into school, there was her car right in front of the high school, right in front of her apartment. So she was home. It was a relief. Oh, good. She's okay. She's at home. But she had no regard for how we would feel. So here we are. She's 3 days into this new life. She knows we go to this high school. Didn't even care. It didn't matter.
And when was at what point did you go over and you knew that night that she left, she had a date?
Well, a couple of weeks had gone by, and I wanted to see her apartment. And I kept asking my dad. I was like, I want to go over there. And he was like, no, you don't need to go check on her. So one particular Saturday morning, it was about 2 weeks after she left, I told Dad, I'm going on a bike ride. I love to ride my bike. And so I rode my bike over to her apartment. It was about a mile, walking distance to the high school. And I parked my bike, and I knocked on her apartment door. She answered the door, and she was dressed. Makeup was perfect. Hair was perfect. It was obvious she was going somewhere. So when she came to the door, she didn't step back. Hey, come on in. She was cordial. And I said, can I see your apartment? I want to see everything. And she was polite and let me in. She was obviously getting dressed for some kind of a date. And I went into her bedroom, and I was snooping. Every 14-year-old snoops, 13-year-old. And I looked in her closet, and she had all these new clothes. And I was like, wow, these are so pretty. And I was looking through them. And there was one particular dress that was baby blue. Blue's my favorite color. And I put it up to me. I walked over to the mirror in the closet door. And she goes, isn't that gorgeous? And I said, oh, yes. And she said, I wore that last Saturday night. And the more we had the conversation, I learned through what the things she had said, it was the Saturday night she left. She had a date the night, the weekend that she left us. And so while I thought she was crying over boxes, drowning herself with toilet paper, wiping her eyes, she was on a date.
Were you mad?
I was furious, but I couldn't. I wanted her attention so badly. I was willing. I had to hold it in. I did. I had to. And so for so many years, I kept all that pain inside. And it finally had to come out. But for many, many years, I had to learn to forgive her. And for so long, I didn't forgive her. And I was more angry with her than I was at God, to be honest. I was angry at her. Like, how could a mother do that? And when we found out we were pregnant for the first time, my husband and I, she called me. She goes, oh, I cannot believe it. I'm so excited for you. I said, yeah. She goes, you know what? I've been thinking about something. And I said, what is that? She goes, you know what? I want a bigger place. And immediately, they were in a 2-bedroom condo. And immediately I thought, oh, she's going to be the grandmother. She's going to make up. My brain was racing. She's going to make up for all this lost time. And she said, you know what? I want a 3rd bedroom. And she goes, you know what I want to do with that? And I immediately think nursery. And she said, I want a big vanity. I want to put things all over the walls. I want to have a big hat rack with hats and purses and makeup and perfumes. And I want to just have a big vanity room that I can get dressed. And if I can tell you, it was such a punch in the stomach.
Oh my gosh.
And I knew she is never going to change. She's never going to change. And I learned years later, she was not capable of loving the way I needed to be loved. She was not capable. And it took years for me to understand that and forgive her. She wasn't capable. There was nothing mean-spirited about it. It was totally selfish. But she lived in this world where she held herself up on such a pedestal. She couldn't make mistakes. She couldn't see herself, as imperfect.
And sure, her, that was like a gut punch to me, and I wasn't even there. So that's just, so with your mother's suicide attempt, so just, and I know this is a lot, this part, part 2 was kind of heavy with your mom and believing in the suicide attempt and stuff. So when she did that, where were you there? I mean, can you kind of walk through that?
Okay, well, she and Henry, we call him Henry in the book, Henry made it very clear on their very first date that she was to be available at his beck and call. This is why she parked where she did. This is why she didn't give out her phone number, because I'm sure he was with her all weekend and she couldn't be talking to her children and consoling her children as to why she didn't give the phone number out. But he had rules and she had to follow those rules. So she would be available whenever he wanted. Well, she moved out, left her family. He left his family. But you know what? He kind of liked the dating life. He liked going out. He was a good-looking guy, blonde hair, blue-eyed, bass guitar player. He was a dentist, prominent, and had the gift of gab. And women fell at his feet once they found out he was single. And so he decided he wanted my mother, but he wanted these other women too. So things went back and forth. My mother loved him so much she could not handle that he wanted to be with other women too. And eventually they were dating. Eventually, after about a year, she told him, if you're not going to give me, if I can't have you, then I might as well not live. She called him at his office and she basically told him, I'm going to take some pills. If you can't love me, then I would rather not live. So she took a bottle of Valium. And what she did was, though, she told him what she was doing. She then called her sister to tell her she had taken some pills. And so her sister called my school. My aunt called my school. They called me to the office. And within 30 minutes, the entire school knew that my mother had overdosed or taken an overdose. So yeah.
You were the first. You went to the hospital.
So it's really hard to talk about.
A teacher. I'm sorry.
So I was called to the office. They'd called an ambulance. I went back to my classroom. In my classroom, I was in the drama class. All the popular kids were in that class. Well, I walked back in to get my things because I needed to get to her apartment, which was right in front of the high school. And my teacher said, "Joe, is everything okay?" And I said, "My mother has taken an overdose." Well, everybody in the class saw. And she ran with me. She goes, "Oh my gosh." So she and I ran out of the school over to the ambulance to answer questions to the fire department. So all the classrooms were in front on the circular drive right in front of my mother's apartment. So the whole school found out. So I went with the fire department and went to the hospital, and my brother was called and he went over to the hospital too. It was also walking distance. It was a small town. So everything we were kind of at this square. And so for several hours, We were in the waiting room. We didn't know if my mother was going to live or she was going to die. I called my dad, and I just said, Dad, mother's taken some pills. She's taken an overdose. She's had an overdose. And he's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I've got a date tonight. Then I called my sister at LSU. Well, she didn't have a car. And she's like, Joe, there's no way I can get there. Just keep me posted on what's going on. And she had been tired of my mother's dramatics over the years. So it was just one more thing. We called my aunt to let her know that she was at the hospital and they were pumping her stomach. And my aunt said, Joe, Honey and Bear cannot know about this. It would just be too much on their hearts. We cannot tell them. So basically, my brother and I were by ourselves at the hospital while my mother, we don't know if she's going to live or die. And
there's a nurse, a charge nurse, I think, that it was getting kind of, dinner time and you all had no money with you and you were starving. And I remember specifically she brought you graham crackers and a Coke, I think, and kind of saw the pitifulness of the whole thing, that like how that touched me too, that y'all were sitting there and again, it has to be swept under the rug. We can't tell. We have to protect her, even though she's the one that did it. So after that happened, did Honey and Bear ever find out about it?
They did, but it was just never talked about. It was just...
you didn't discuss it?
And Honey and I talked about it a couple of weeks before she died, but we couldn't talk about it. And she felt my mother was perfect, too. She couldn't... but one thing I want to say, just with the title of my book, The Lemon Tree, even that charge nurse that brought over the crackers... I learned over the years to have a good sense of discernment. I can read people's faces and I can see hurt in people's eyes, sometimes to a fault, like I want to help everybody. But when you see, just as you see somebody that looks sad, or just look on their face, they have a furrowed brow, or they've got their arms crossed, or you see somebody sitting by themselves, just wonder, what can I do? Ask the Lord, what can I do? Is that person is on my mind. Just going and saying, hey, you look pretty today. I'm glad you're here today. Or, I like that top. But you never know what one little kind comment can do for someone. And such a tragic day. I could have lost my mother. The shame and embarrassment that the whole school knew. I was a teenager. I was angry at my dad that a date would come before his children. I couldn't say anything to Honey and Bear. Hope couldn't just find a car and borrow a car, to be with us. All these things.
And you still had to protect Gilly.
And I still had to protect Gilly. And Gilly was so heartbroken. And this was his mother that loved him so much. And you just never know what shoes somebody is walking in, And I feel that God does put people like that sweet nurse that knew those poor kids have got to be hungry. And nobody's giving them any information. And just that we can always be a light. We can always be a lemon tree to someone.
Always. And the Lord always provided those people just when you needed them most. Miss McCarter at Lemon Tree, she's my favorite. I mean, and I'm not completely through, but her and seeing that nurse too, it reminded me, because we live in a society where we're all so busy and we're running here and there and all these things and social media and our minds are flooded and we're always down, our eyes are always looking down. We're not, and I'm speaking to myself too, because this is a great reminder to me, we're not looking around us to look at people and just, how are you today? Or how, like you said, you look pretty, or I love your shirt, or, whatever it is that shows that somebody is seen. And I think God put that in your heart, and really He wove that into your DNA before the beginning of all of this, so that you could be that light to people because of all the darkness that you had to endure, but still always had that light from Jesus in you, that He allowed all of that to happen because of that. And I know on part 3, on our next podcast, we're going to go into the time in your life where you went to LSU, you had your graduation, and there was a whole other thing. There was a lot of financial issues. Your dad was not good with money. There was a whole thing about graduation and how were you going to pay for it, and you had gotten a job, and there's just a whole bunch of teasers I could say about just exactly like when your dad said, you guys are going to go and get, 2 seconds after school's over, you have to get a job. Right. Because he's not paying for stuff. And so all of those type of things to then the part where you go to LSU and then you meet this handsome blue-eyed man. And so that's going to be part 3 that we're really excited about. But I think any last thoughts on this part 2 of the...
No, I just think just the message is God
So
is
wonderful.
always there. And whenever you feel there's no hope, there is hope. There, you can get through. There are always hills and valleys, and there are going to be the valleys, but you can get through the valleys. It just, you're going to get there. So
it's so encouraging, and I'm so thankful to be a part of this. And every time that I keep continuing in the book, and I'm on my balcony last night reading, and I'm like, I don't want to go to bed because it's so engaging and you're so real about everything, and it's not heavy, it's not dark, it's not it's so relatable, and it really shows the vulnerability of what you've went through, but how God had you and still has you the entire time. I mean, and what he set up for your life from the beginning, and the people that you're going to be able to touch, through this memoir, which was very hard to write and very hard to get through. But it has helped me tremendously. So I just thank you for being able to listen, for listening and obeying the Lord when he put that on your heart to write this. But part 3 is coming, and it's going to be even more wonderful information, and it's so good. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. And
well, thank you. And I couldn't have a better person as interviewing me. So thank you so much. And you guys have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast, hosted by author Joe Alch. You can find more information on Joe's beginnings and the Lemon Tree at thelemontreebook.com.